impetus for this started with looking last year when we were doing our school budget planning. The Board of Education had the wherewithal to be looking down the road and paying attention to what could be coming at us in terms of economic circumstances, with the idea that some of the federal funds that have helped us through COVID will be going away. And also, after making good on fully funding foundation aid for the state of New York last year, we also knew that school finance was going to change in terms of what Avon could expect from the foundation aid formula. So we're learning about that now. We're trying to navigate some unexpected changes in the foundation aid formula, along with the disappearing of the COVID relief funds. And as we head to the future, we wanted to make sure that we're planning appropriately, not just on a year-to-year basis, but looking down the road and understanding the legacy implications of the school budgets that we put forward. So a critical part of that has been, working and trying to create a long-range plan. So the Board of Education had the wherewithal to reach out and want to work with an absolute expert in school finance, and that's Dr. Rick Timbs. Dr. Rick Timbs has worked with schools at the BOCES level, been a local school superintendent, and for the last several years has been the executive director of the Statewide School Finance Consortium. So when it comes to school finance, it's one of those examples where this gentleman has probably forgotten more than most of us know in terms of school finance. So he's been working closely with our business office and with our Board of Education, looking at doing an audit, so to speak, of our finances, a review of our finances, and helping us to look into the future, see where some things are going in terms of the electrification of school buses, what might be happening with foundation aid, and taking a look at our reserves and how do we come up with a plan that gives the students what they want and what they need, most importantly, while at the same time helping the district to navigate some pretty significant financial challenges. So I appreciate Dr. Timbs taking his time this evening to do this with us. We're going to go ahead and record the session, and our intention is to, after the session is over, do some editing of it and try to get it posted to our website early next week at some point in time. So it is mostly a webinar format. It's a really small group right now. If you have a question, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and type it into the chat while Rick is doing the initial part of his presentation. The chat can be found in the lower right-hand corner. It looks like a chat box feature right next to a couple of people that indicates 6. You can just type it in there, and either Michelle, Kristen, or I will be able to read the chat, and we'll come in and moderate with Rick if it's something that needs to be answered right away. And then we're hoping to save time for the end of the evening for Rick to just open up and answer as many questions as we can in terms of school finance. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rick Timbs, and thank you very much for being here tonight. Rick, take it away.
Well, thank you for the invite. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my screen over to my little PowerPoint so we can actually walk our way through this and try and explain basically how the tax cap works and the mechanisms under which it works and things that influence the tax cap. So here we go. All right, so I hope everybody can see my screen. Ryan, are we all set? Everybody see my screen, I think? Okay, here we go. First of all, what we're going to do is we're going to use actual school district data from Avon Central School District. And we're going to explain how the tax cap works, the mechanisms are in it, and how it all fills out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 23-24 school year tax cap calculation. So the first number in this 8-step process is really to put in what the previous year's tax levy was. So you always start off where you left off. So in other words, to calculate the 23-24 aid, you start off with the tax levy from 22-23. It is then multiplied times something known as the tax base growth factor. Now this number comes from the Office of Real Property Tax Services. It's a state number. The district doesn't calculate it. It's given to the district. And what it is, it's a measure of the growth of tax base in the school district. So when the number is over 1.000, if it's above that number, which this number is, it means the tax base is growing. It is multiplied in the formula by law so that the district then can make use of the increased tax base by collecting more taxes from the tax base. So colloquially, I kind of tell a story this way. It's kind of like it's Thursday night and 4 guys come over to my house to play poker. So there's 5 of us all together, and we all throw $1 in the kitty, and we're ready to play. And all of a sudden, the 6th person shows up and says, "Hey, I want to play too." Well, we don't go and take some money out of the kitty so that the kitty stays at $5. That new person adds to the base, or the tax base of the kitty, and therefore the winner then could avail themselves of the full kitty. And that's exactly what happens here. This is the tax base for the school district. It is increasing. It is actually possible to increase taxes, and everybody's taxes hypothetically at some point in taxing of levy increase, taxes not move because of the increase in tax base. So this is encouraging districts in this formula to go and use all of its new tax base. Now, please be clear, this has nothing to do with assessed values and equalization rates. This means there's simply more to tax. Somebody built a house, somebody built a garage, somebody built a barn, some business opened up that is now tax eligible. Something happened that is increasing the base. So technically speaking, there's more items that can pay taxes. Then what we do is we add the pilot agreements, payments in lieu of taxes from the 22-23 school year to this computation. So payments are really for businesses that have pilots in the school district. They do not pay into the levy. So this number is then added to the levy so that you can determine exactly how much was collected in this revenue stream by the school district, or how much they're eligible to collect. Subtracted from that is what's known as the capital levy for the prior year. Now, the capital levy goes by a number of names. Sometimes it's called the capital exclusion. Sometimes it's called the local share. Sometimes it's called the capital levy exclusion. But by definition, here's what it is. It's the use of all monies by the school district for capital expenses. Now, capital expenses would be all of your capital projects that are still on the books. In other words, you could have done a capital project 10 years ago and you still have a debt payment for that capital project, principal and interest payment. That is part of your capital levy. You may also have bought maybe a school bus or a new capital project. Whatever capital expenses, including BOCES capital expenses, are included here. So you add them all up, but then you subtract from them the aid you're receiving for those purposes. So the district may be getting transportation aid for buses, could be getting building aid for the capital projects, it could be getting aid for capital projects through BOCES. In your case, you're getting in aid that actually cancels out your levy. In other words, you actually have no exclusion because it was canceled out, because the numbers are either equal or the amount of state support exceeds the amount of cost to the district. Regardless of the reason, the number is 0 in this case, and we add these numbers together. And here's the new net. Then what happens is there's something known as the allowable growth factor. What is the allowable growth factor? It's actually the consumer price index for the last 12 months. This is where the 2% tax cap gets its name. The 2% tax cap is never 2%. Only this number cannot exceed 2%. And this is, again, a multiplier. So here we got a 1.02, which means that inflation, by the way, in that year was 8%, but the district can only claim a maximum of 2%. That's where the moniker 2% tax cap comes from. Now, that doesn't mean the taxes are limited to 2%. It means this number is limited to 2. A couple of years ago, inflation was 1.23%, and therefore this number for that prior calculation would be 1.0123. If inflation goes to 30 bazillion percent, this number cannot exceed 1.02. Therefore, that's the name. But it does not mean taxes are limited to 2%. So you multiply it. Now, why do you multiply it? That's because in this state formula, and of course, we can't change any of this, the state formula says when there's inflation, we're going to limit the amount you can gain in your levy, but we want you to gain more to beat some of the inflation forces against the district. So you multiply and you come up with a new net number. Now, from this number, you subtract the next year's pilot agreements. So the next year's pilot agreements, the pilot is stable in your district right here for these years. And so what happens, you subtract it because this money will come in separate. In other words, this will not be taxed into the levy. This money will come in separately. It's added up here for the computation. And then the new number, it just happens to be your number is stable, is subtracted down here. Then you're allowed to add what's called available carryover. so that if the district went below the tax cap in the prior year, they could actually take a large portion of that money and add it to their tax cap. So they actually have a chance to collect it again. So in other words, if they didn't collect it the year before, they have a chance to collect the majority of that money over again. But this is only good for 1 year. If they do not collect it in the next year, the money is lost. And therefore, we have what's called the levy before adjustments. Then what's added to it is the capital levy for 23-24. And again, state support equals or exceeds your capital costs. So your levy limit was $10,661,928, or a 2.5119% increase. This would increase, this levy would then be $261,253 more than the previous year's levy. And that's exactly how the tax cap worked for this year for the Avon Central School District. So then what would happen is, what do you do next year? Well, next year, remember, you would then try to collect the levy. And then what would happen is that levy would be used to start the next year's computation. Now, for the 24-25 year, again, the tax base growth factor is growing. So the tax base in Avon continues to grow. Again, you get a new net. You add on the pilots from the prior year. You didn't have a capital levy exclusion. You have a new net. And again, inflation is now 4.1%. So this number is limited to 2. Here's our new net. And then we have pilots, but the pilots have changed. The pilot goes up. So actually, when a pilot goes up, it actually drives the cap down. But what we also have as a countervening measure is, this year, we are allowed to have what we call an ERS exclusion. It's rare. It does happen. It's only happened ERS or TRS, which are the pension systems for the state that the school district is required to pay, has gone up 16% since last year. And so what we get to do is take a percentage of that, 10% of it, and we can use it in the tax cap. And then here's the levy before adjustments again. And now we have the capital levy for the new year. So now the state support is not enough to pay for the entire amount of capital costs for the school district. It is $73,087 short. And in all the capital project and improvement resolutions passed by the voters, there's inside the resolution, it says, and levy the tax thereto. Therefore, the district is required to put this money in its calculation to levy the tax. Then this would produce the new levy limit of $10,944,357, which is a 2.6489% increase, which would have a yield of $282,429. So that's how it would work. That's how the whole system is supposed to work, just like this. But what we had something different happen. What happens, instead of collecting the 2.519% or the 261,000, the district decided to actually not collect the entire tax cap, which is their prerogative. They decided to collect only 1.19% instead. So this granted relief to taxpayers, but at the same time, it decreased really the amount of revenue that could be given to the school district. So instead of collecting 261,000 and change, it only collected 123. Now, this 123 doesn't appear to be a lot, but I think if you were to look across every single property value in the district, you will find it's not like a lot of money per parcel because it's so widespread. But it did decrease the burden to taxpayers, and therefore they paid less. In other words, the increase to the district was not 261, it was 123. So what's going to happen here now is the district cannot use the 10,661 for its new computation. It can only use the 10,524 for its new computation. So in other words, technically almost forever, there's going to be one exception. The tax cap will be depressed for the district in infinity forever, unless it does something different. And it has one bite of that apple to do it. So let's explain what the choices were. The choices were collect the whole cap, start the new year with 10,661, calculate the tax cap to collect 282 the next year, or not collect the tax cap and therefore diminish the amount that you start with the next year, did the calculation over. So instead of collecting this amount, collect this amount. So what's going to happen is they're going to, instead of collecting the 282, they're going to collect the 279. So you say to yourself, well, it doesn't look like a big difference. Well, there's more to it than that. When the district made the decision not to collect the $261,000 and decided to collect the 123, it set something else in motion. Let me give you a colloquial example of how that works. Let's just say, for instance, I had 5 people that were going to work for me Monday through Friday. And I promised them that if they did a really, really good job, I would pay them $100 a day. So I come to the Monday and I look at it and I think to myself, gee, I don't want to separate myself from $100. So I turn to these people and I say, look, you did a pretty good job, but it wasn't perfect. So I'm only going to give you $90. Now those people were expecting 100, so they started living on 100. They bought things based on that income and everything else, but now they're only 90, so they're short $10 for the Monday. Tuesday comes along and I say to myself, well, if they took 90 yesterday, they'll take 90 again today. So I give them another 90 on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, they are short $10 again, but cumulatively, they're short $20. If we keep this up by Friday, and on Friday I pay them another 90, just like every day of the week, they will be short $10 on Friday, but cumulatively over the week, they will be short $50. And that's exactly how the tax cap works. And many communities, boards, many people don't really understand that concept because it looks so simple. This looks so simple. But behind this simple calculation is something very complex. And here's how it works. So what we've got here is this is if the district collected, as best we know, the tax cap from last year into next year. Well, actually it's current year into this year, and they kept the tax cap going. Now what I've done is I've done this. Here would be the new levy limit that was last year's. This would have been what you could collect this coming year if they had not lowered the levy. What I did then is I actually started stabilizing some of the numbers. And so actually what happens is we see the pilot is going to move. We can see this levy is going to go up here. There will be no carry we put in. You have absorbed the difference right here in your capital needs. They are no longer existing. So what we do is we would want to collect the tax cap every year. Then what we'd want is we'd want to see what the percentage was. You can see it goes up and down a little bit. Now, if you'll notice in this example right here, we've got a change in the actual value of the pilots. In other words, the pilot is going down a bit, and actually the exclusion here for capital levy is actually disappearing. Then it stays disappearing, and then we see the pilot creeping up compared to the next year. And I've got these all going at different rates. Then all of a sudden the pilot drops. When the pilot drops, the tax cap goes up. When the pilot goes up, the tax cap goes down. So we would keep looking at the debt service over this period of time, and I finally it zeroes right out. We would look at the ERS exclusion, only good for this year. We don't know if it'll be available next year, so we didn't include it. We noticed that the pilot changes every year, so we've included the pilot change. You can see the complete difference here. Look at the loss of the pilot, which means now this money, in other words, those pilots that are being reduced are now sitting in the tax-based growth factor, which I actually just froze as if there was no growth, but it's going to be in there. So it'll actually increase that number. And then what happens is we have the tax-based growth factor freezes over time, but I've actually tried to minimize it because I didn't want anybody to think that I would be exaggerating the calculation. So this is actually depressing the calculation. So if you can see, it's pretty stable, and it goes down because of the changing of the capital levy, changing of the tax of the pilots, and then over here it goes up basically because of the changing of the pilots. So this is really what it looks like the district hypothetically could collect between 23-24 school year and 28-29 school year. But let's see what happens. So here we go. Let's start off and analyze what's going on. So this is the slide I showed you earlier where they decided not to collect over 2%, but the 1.19 and the 123,000. So in that year, they did not collect. In other words, if they collected the 123, they could have collected $137,485 more in that year, but they did not collect it. So now we go to the next year and we look at the calculations using our analysis. And we see that what's going to happen is because they depressed the levy, they did not collect the full amount. They didn't collect 10,666,000. They collected 10,524,000. They have to start off with the lower amount, which automatically lowers the entire tax calculation by $3,000. But here we are. This is Monday. This is Tuesday. They still can't collect the 137,485 they were supposed to collect on Monday. So what happens is they can't collect the 137,485 because the levy was depressed. They can't collect $3,086. So now they can't collect 140. Well, what happens if we keep going with this? Well, if we keep going with this means the next year, because the cap was depressed over here, it depresses this levy by $2,801. They still can't get that $137,000. Then there's the $3,000 they lost from the prior year, plus the $2,800 they lost from this year. Now they're behind by 143. Here again, depressed, so they lose another 2,868. So you can see what's starting to happen. It's cumulative. It's cumulative. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and let's add Saturday for good measure. So they fall behind each time. So if we look as the recurring 137 lost that year, 140 that year, 143, 146, 149, and 149 and change. So cumulatively, if we look across this thing, what happens is the grand total lost revenue simply by not accepting this 137,000 and then staying to the tax cap thereafter. In other words, just stay to the cap after this, but just do this 1 year and lower it. The district by the year 2829 will be behind $866,000 in revenue could have had. Now, the interesting thing is this levy is actually $152,000 less than it could have been. So they lost another 152. So they're really behind by 2829 over $1 million. So I would say, okay, no problem if the district in 2829 does not need $1 million. But I think as the superintendent said at the beginning of the program, here's what's going to happen. First of all, you have escalating costs and benefits going across all these years for your programs. Let's face it, the state aid is lackluster this year. Matter of fact, the governor wants to take state aid away from many districts. And those districts that have increases, they will be very small. That means there'll be a heavier reliance on tax levy to keep the district alive. So to keep the district alive means keeping its programs going, keeping capital projects going. Matter of fact, if you'll notice in here, there's not even a new capital project in here. So in other words, no more capital projects. In other words, can't fix anything, can't fix the roof, can't do anything. Just got to keep the programs going. So what we've got is a real problem here because our costs are starting to escalate pretty rapidly. Okay, there's also great competition for, I dare say, staff. Many districts can't find bus drivers. Contractual obligations are increasing. And at the same time, your revenues are being constrained. And here's a big constraint on revenues. So I believe, and our analysis is starting to point out easily, that the district is going to need the $1 million. So the big question is, what is the district supposed to do now? Is there any way to stop this continuous loss of money? And yes, there is. There is. They have the ability to do something very really unique here, only one time only. What they can do is they can actually, remember there was over a couple $1,000s in ERS in here. They can actually take a large portion of this money and use it as the available carryover, but they can only do it once. So what they would have to do is increase taxes. Because they didn't increase taxes 2.6% here and did it 1.2%, they can get the money, most of the money, not all of it, some of it back this year if they do 3.96. But if they don't do that, they are going to be right back here because they only have one chance. If they do not do it in this fiscal year here, they cannot do it ever again to reclaim any or all of that money. So their only way out is to do that. Therefore, they would get about $134,399 back. So here's their 137 loss. Here's the 3,000 loss because the cap was depressed for that 1 year. And then what would actually happen is the net decrease over this period of time, if they stay to the cap thereafter, with the pilots moving up and down, of course, we don't have any capital projects or anything else in there, then the loss would only be $157,000. Now, if the goal of the school district is to protect program, keep the building integrity going and everything, I believe they're going to need the $1 million. This is something they would want to do. Now, obviously, taxpayers would say, oh my goodness, but we need some relief too. Well, the Board of Education's job is education. So what they want to do is keep the programs for the kids, because they understand that this program, when those kids graduate, by the way, I don't know how many graduations everybody's been to, but I always noticed that even if they're 18 years old, they're still kids. They've got a big life ahead of them, and this is the program that's going to launch that life. And this is their first. This is completely a protected environment for them to grow and prosper, and this is the only shot some of them are going to get. Some may go on to higher ed, some may go on to trades. A lot of these kids, this may be it. So the key thing is that the district is now saying maybe what we ought to do now is we tried to help everybody out, but now in retrospect, we see how harmful this might be to our long-term health financially. Keep our programs robust and going, take care of our buildings, health, security, safety, those types of things. And so we might want to take a shot at this to try and get some of this. We can't get it all back, but we can get some of it back so that we can run on the straight and narrow from this point on. So that's basically how the scenarios work. And you can see here the numbers. So with that, I could answer any questions that you have and try and address any questions at all, and we'll see what we can come up with.
So each participant at this point should have the ability to unmute themselves and ask questions. So I didn't see any questions come into the chat as we were moving along the way. So I think if you have a question that you'd like to ask, you can just go ahead and unmute if you don't mind introducing yourself, and we will determine the best way to answer the question.
Rick, Bruce Amy here. So in essence, you're saying that this coming year, the board can choose to do something with ERS, which will help at least minimize that $1 million loss by the 28-29 school year, the loss in ability to collect taxes. And that's only this given year. They can't do it. Wait for another year to do it. It can only be done in the coming fiscal year.
Well, kind of. You got the right idea. The ERS is automatically in there anyway. It's the carryover that they're actually including. So it's a portion of the money they did not collect last year. Now, they cannot reclaim all of it, but they can reclaim a portion of it, okay? And, almost all of it. But the thing is, because the levy from one year to the next is automatically already depressed, they can't undo that. You're still going to lose 3,000 of it. That makes sense?
And I forget what year it was, but you had the levy increase projections, at least in a reasonable way, and then one year they really jumped up again to 4-point-something%. Was that because of pilots?
Yes. What's going to happen here is I did not move your tax base number, because I don't want anybody saying, well, you're moving a number to move the formula. So I did not do that. I actually flattened it to zero. But yes, what's going to happen is that any pilots that come off the pilot, we'll say schedule, those properties will now become part of the tax base, and you're supposed to levy the tax to go get the money. Does that make sense? Because that's where now they're eligible to pay tax.
Yeah. The Dr. Piketty, the pilots we have are still, Barilla is just about done, right?
I believe that what you're seeing there is the Barilla pilot coming off. Yeah.
And what other pilots does the district receive from?
There's a long list of them. There's some that are done with the IDA, and there's some that are done more locally. Okay. And then we're also in conversation now. It's really kind of an interesting one with the town of Caledonia in the Horseshoe Solar Project. So it's the town of Caledonia, but the Avon School District is where the panels will be. So we're in conversation with them about that pilot possibly coming into the mix as Barilla would be going out of it. So it's the coming and going. So I find that to be like so the pilot role is some of the most interesting in this allowable levy. So, as Rick said, if we have a pilot that's paying $150,000 of our revenues through a pilot, and they go out off of the pilot, so that revenue stream from the pilot is gone. And really what the state is saying is your tax levy now needs to grow by that, because this entity now needs to be paying traditional taxes. So the 150, instead of being a combination of the levy and the pilot, needs to just come from the levy. And so the consequence is a higher rate, but it may not impact all of the property owners the same, because this one property that conceivably should be quite valuable because it's been a large pilot is now paying its share in terms of a traditional tax levy. How'd I do, Rick? I've been trying to learn like crazy.
Well, Bruce, let me give you an example. You know where they're building up there near Malta, the big chip factories and all that?
Yep.
You know that up there near Malta where they have the big chip factories? What I did is I had to go up to the school district there. They were increasing their levy 3%, and all the people's taxes were going down 4% because of the increase in the base. Now, obviously, that's a real weird example, but hypothetically, that's how the math works.
When the Barilla pilot started, there was the anticipation that when it ended, the property might be assessed at $200 million or something like that, because it was purchased at 125. And I was saying to folks at the time that the state aid's going to fall, because now the assessed value of the district jumped up by $200 million. And yet folks' levy, hopefully, rate would not jump up as well, because there's the Barilla property we'd be paying in. But then it's my understanding that Barilla has contested their assessed value, which is not uncommon. And as such, the taxable property won't raise up the 200 million that was anticipated when the pilot was first entered.
Actually, Bruce, it could be more complicated than that. Let's just say they do a tax certiorari claim and charge the district, the town, the village, or wherever else is involved in this thing. What's going to happen is the district would then collect the tax regardless of the claim. In other words, they would collect the tax based on the assessed value by the assessor, even though Barilla says they should be paying less. Then what's going to happen is the district should put that money into a tax certiorari reserve, so that if Barilla wins the case, right, if you know, a judge will say 90 days, you got to pay them back all their money. So the point is even though then they collect the tax, they can't spend the money. A mistake by some districts is they spend the money and figure, well, we'll think of something later. The think of something later does not work. I'm right now going out for a $5 million tax cert bond for a district that did not save the money. And now we're going to tank their budget.
Of course.
So just for the real examples there, the district did do the proper avenue on that. We did have the tax cert reserve established, and we waited for the settlement. It was actually kind of unique because Barilla was contesting the escalation of the value in the pilot, as opposed to waiting for it to come off the pilot and then challenge the assessment. So it was beneficial because the parties reached an agreement to move forward, and they changed the escalation, accepted what history had been established, and then moved forward. So then the Board of Education was able to act, but we were prepared to potentially have to give that money back within the time period you discussed.
Dr. Timbs, one of the things that I think has been very beneficial from your presentation is the notion that whatever the levy is set at in a given year becomes the springboard for the next year. That's where you start again. And to sit there and politically, it's always nice to be able to present a budget with a low tax rate to the community, because again, it's coming out of their pocket. But at the same token, what you illustrated is what you lose over time and the advancement of that, and its impact on what you're able to do for the students in the community, again, will be one of those things that you might come back with a 13% increase because you got to cover your costs.
Right. Well, let's use my story again, and let's go one step further. So let's just say we did the whole story over again, but I'll say all of a sudden on Monday, I said, geez, after I paid you the $90, I felt bad. So I want to give you a 5% raise. So what would the 5% be on, the 90 or the 100? It'd be on the 90. So watch this. Even if I gave you a raise, I could then short you 50 cents a day. So in other words, I still make a loser out of you, even after I increase you.
I always knew you were such a nice guy.
And I'd like just to establish that participant, Bruce Amy, mentioned a 13% tax levy as a hypothetical, as an example. It was just for consideration. It was in no way a
Right.
reference to this year's school budget.
Yeah, I have no idea what this year's school budget looks like because it hasn't been made public yet. So from that perspective, yeah, you're right. It was very hypothetical.
Any other questions or comments for me? I'd be glad
What
to
other
answer.
questions are out there?
This is Mark Fiesel.
Hi, Mark.
Thank you for doing this meeting. It was very informal, informational to me, so I could see how things are working. So nice job. My question comes into, how do I word this correctly? In the improvement program that we had on this building about a year ago, there was a meeting about the additions and modifications to the schools and improvements in that sound like a roof and the entrance ways and so forth. If we had not spent that money on those projects, if we had left the buildings as they were and didn't do any of that, would any of these numbers had changed? Would they have changed from what you're just presented? Because as I remember, you took that money out of like a capital reserve.
Yeah.
It was no tax levy. There was no increase in taxes to do that project.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I understand your question. So like, I think you're wondering is like we committed to the work ahead, whether, it's some classrooms and it's some HVAC and building safety kind of work. If we didn't do that project, how would that impact the calculation of this levy? And Rick, I'm going to ask you to chime in when I'm done, but for the impact would be minimal because we did get approval from the established capital building reserve that existed. So by doing that, the monies were set aside for this type of purpose to cover the local share for the purpose of trying to minimize the impact to the community so that we can do things in an ongoing fashion without having to levy any additional taxes. So I think the impact of doing it the way we did it is we're spending some out of that capital reserve. So that limits what we can do in the future. But it smoothed the impact of the taxes to the extent that we could control it.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct. The other thing about capital projects is one of the major problems that schools have sometimes is trying to figure out what to do in a capital project. And the use of the capital reserve also, remember, capital projects aren't fully state aided, right? I mean, there's a huge portion of state aid support, but the use of the reserve actually fills in the blank. That's what's so nice about saving the money. And if you don't collect money, you can't save money. So that's the other piece. Also, keep in mind that capital projects over the future are going to be more expensive. For instance, I've got a number of clients in the Buffalo area, and you're not that far away. Bill's Stadium is soaking up a lot of labor. All right. So the idea is I'm glad you actually did that capital project when you did, because I think the timing was terrific. And they'll be done with that project in a couple of years. But I mean, my point would be is the timing of the capital project was paramount to this district's success, and the use of the capital reserve was one of the smartest things you'll ever get. I mean, that was terrific. You saved up the money, and you then offset the part that's not covered by state support, so that you did not have to increase taxes for it, basically.
I'd like to, invite any other questions, but while somebody might be thinking about unmuting and asking a question, Rick, I want to prompt you with like the opportunity for a takeaway. Like, if you, I know you are probably have driven more miles on the throughway than most of us combined at this point, but if you could, one, two, or three things that you really think it's important for the public to understand about what I'm referring to as the allowable growth factor variable of the taxes. What would you want? What do you think is most important that people understand?
I think what people have to understand is, well, a district sometimes does not go to the tax cap because they're well-meaning. They try and help taxpayers out. Their real mission is to protect the school district. Safety and security in the capital projects, and making sure you have capital reserves and so on for future projects, all these things, and making sure your programs stay robust is really their goal. So they should do it, and they are doing it as effectively and inexpensively and efficiently as possible. So I don't see this district. I work with Bruce can tell you, I work with over 300 school districts in state aid. And I also have a number of about 70 private clients of my own. And the biggest mistake I see is when they don't go to the cap and stay to the cap and keep things on an even keel. When all of a sudden they need money, they need a massive increase, much to, lined with like Bruce's comment. It may not be huge, like it's not like 30% or something, but it's usually out of the normal range. And people wonder, what were you people thinking? Well, the idea is I think everybody's trying to help everybody else out. But the key thing is slow and steady wins the race. Stay to the script, that's why the tax cap was there. It was developed so the district would have license to secure only the amount of money that they need to operate. And the rest of it should be based on their efficiency and economy of scale. And that's why the cap is there. It's so the district cannot go wild, but at the same time, it needs that cap because of the escalating costs. So to me, it's kind of like this. If my hot water tank is going and my wife says, hey, look, I called the HVAC company, it's $12.50 for a new hot water tank. That's the basic price, Rick. I don't start a savings account for $9.50. It doesn't change the price of the hot water tank. We've got to think ahead. The thing about this district that's really so good here right now is they are thinking ahead. In other words, it's not just next year's budget they want to think about. It's the 28-29 budget. Right now, state law says that in 27, 28, and 28, 29, this district, and I hope they change this law, this district will be required to buy zero-emission buses at $500,000 each. Right now, you can buy a diesel for about 160, 168, somewhere in that. So this is going to be a big hit. They will need that money. So if they do not right the ship now, I think the future will be less bright. I mean, that is the ultimate takeaway. I think the district tried to be really helpful to the taxpayers, but I think now in reflection, now that everybody knows how this works, they're thinking, you know what, maybe we better get right back on course. I think that's the takeaway. That takes a lot of courage for a board, but it also takes the community to rise up and support its schools. So that's the way I'm looking at it, because things get worse fast.
Thanks for that summary. If there are any other questions, please feel free to unmute. Otherwise, I will repeat that our intention was to record this so that if people didn't have the opportunity to attend this evening, that they would have the ability to view it online. We will edit it and revise it. And we thank so much, Rick, for presenting for us and also your willingness to let us record it and post it to our website. Thank you for that. And we thank you all for attending. It's important, I think, that we have an understanding of how these things work. They get branded as a tax cap. I think hopefully Rick has made it clear that it's really more of a tax guide in terms of how we go forward. And it's very complex, and it's difficult to understand from time to time. And it's helpful to be looking down the road. And it's really great to have a partner like Rick who's helping us to do that. So thank you everyone for attending. We appreciate your time. Last chance for any unmute questions.
Just one statement. I'm disappointed that more of the community didn't join this today. I'm very disappointed. I appreciate the reach out from Michelle to send me the link, and I saw it. I got right on it. So thank you for the presentation. It was very well done. So thank you, and I appreciate everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I'll take some of the ownership of the community not necessarily being able to chime in. We were able to get this scheduled a little bit later, and then due to some other conflicts coming up in the coming weeks, it was going to be too far out, I think, to be helpful. So we opted to do the recording tonight and post it. But it would have been nice to have a bigger audience for sure. But we thank those who came.
Thanks so much, Rick. It's great to see you again. Great to see everyone else. Take care.
Okay.
Stay well.
Thank you very much for your kind attention, everyone. Good evening.
Thanks, Rick. Great night.